Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2 of the But If Not podcast. It's been a week, hasn't it? I was planning to do this episode a little bit more on the Judicial Nominating Commission or perhaps some of the issues in the gubernatorial race. I do want to talk about the candidates, but obviously with what has happened this week, a historic generation defining event, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We're going to be talking about that. The title of this episode is Why Christians Not Just Can, but Should Support the Death Penalty for the Charlie Kirk Shooter. So I just want to take a few minutes and share my reaction. There's been a lot. I've posted a lot of stuff. I've posted so much stuff over the past 72 hours. And I have not been sleeping well. I slept maybe 2 hours Wednesday night, 2 hours Thursday night. I had to call off work Friday. I was so sleep deprived, and I slept zero. Last night, Friday night, this is Saturday the 13th as I'm recording this here. This is going to define us. This was an MLK or JFK type moment for Gen Z. And just seeing some of the stuff, I've just choked up and just broken down time after time after time. Seeing clips of like his daughter running into his arms when he's sitting in on a talk show, and Tim Pool, breaking it. I was at work and I was just, I'd just finished up an assignment, and before I transitioned to the next thing on my task list, I pull up my phone, and I was just going through the Facebook drivel, and I see breaking from the Lion, breaking Charlie Kirk shot, condition unknown, and I just start going through all this stuff, looking what I can find, and I saw a reel with a long distance live streaming, college students there. Oh, hey, cool, I'm going take a reel of me watching Charlie Kirk debate and whatnot, and captured the shot at a distance. And so from that shot, I'm like, oh, it was either the chest, but then I saw his head slump, and I'm like, that may have been his head. And then I saw another shot, and sources started saying the neck, and I'm like, oh no, that's it. And then later that evening, I did watch a close-up shot of it, and I'm glad I did. I needed to stare and see that evil. I needed to see that. I needed to remind myself, but I don't ever want to do it again. And I told my wife, I'm not letting you watch this. And then just, you think you've gone through that, and then the next day you see something else. You see Tim Pool starting his show for the night, and Tim Pool's a stoic dude, and just, and he's not fully on the right. He's he openly acknowledges, I'm an agnostic. I'm still left on certain issues, especially social issues, and just to hear him start cracking, and him trying to hold it together while he's announcing it, and Megyn Kelly not holding it together and just breaking down live on air. And then again last night we saw Erica give that message. What a message. But of course I just broke into 100 pieces again hearing that. And it all reminds me when I was living in Korea. The pastor, the second pastor of the church I was at, we had two great pastors. I was in a small town. They only had one English. Korea has a lot of churches, but the small town I was in only had one church with an English-speaking service. to provide a place for foreigners living in the city to have a worship service. So the pastors tend to be pretty short term. It's kind of an itinerant, rotating gig, and so I had a wonderful Canadian pastor the first year I was there, and then the second year I had a wonderful Korean American pastor who had a really cool testimony the second year. He had very rough, rebellious childhood, got into lots of drugs and stuff like that, and his parents didn't know what to do with him and sent him to his oma, his grandma in Korea, and God just got a hold of him there. He experienced some real direct spiritual stuff, and is a wonderful man, wonderful pastor. But I remember this anecdote he told there. It's just a wonderful thing. And it breaks my heart to tell it here. You'll understand why in a bit. He says in South Korea, they have this strong, tough, masculine man's man culture. They have K-pop and stuff like that. But they every male, unless you're like a doctor or a med student or a professional athlete, every able-bodied male in South Korea has to do several years of military service. They just always have to have a military ready should North Korea invade at a moment's notice. And it is kind of nice. It's wonderful because they're very patriotic, and it pays so many dividends. There's no NEETs, not employed, or whatever it is, the term that describes men who aren't even trying to get a job. Everyone is very engaged. Listlessness and idleness is very looked down on in Korea, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But their culture is such, they kind of tell this anecdote as a joke. They say there's 3 times it's acceptable for a Korean man to cry: on the day he is born, the day he died, the day his parents die, to mourn his parents. That strong familial culture of obedience to parents, and if the country has fallen, if the country ever falls. Those are the 3 times it's acceptable for a Korean man to cry. And obviously it's not literally true, but I felt like the 3rd one this week. I have been crying that 3rd Korean cry this week, and Konstantin Kissin of Trigonometry summed it up very well. He's like, this is a bigger destruction of innocence than 9/11 and the Trump assassination. As awful and jarring as that was, it's like, okay, it statistically happens to presidents, to politicians in general. It does happen. Charlie wasn't a politician, although I'm sure he could have and would have been president one day. But his real passion, the issue he spoke about most frequently, wasn't support the Second Amendment or low taxes or strong immigration policy or anything like that. It was family. He knew to change America, you change the family. And I don't think Charlie is a nameless martyr. Let me pull up Revelation here. Oops. That verse from Revelation. I apologize for the low quality. I've just had so little sleep. You're getting yet another garage quality episode. I love y'all. Revelation 6, where the martyrs are crying out to God, how long, O Lord, until you avenge the blood of these righteous martyrs for you. And let me pull up the full passage. I hate AI summaries. How long, O sovereign Lord, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? And he was told, they were given a white robe and told to wait a little while longer until the full number of their servants had been killed. There will be more. but God is moving through this, and I think the church is really going to grow. It's really going to grow. So we're 10 minutes in. I need to get moving on to our main topic today. Is of course they have found and arrested the shooter. I'm not going to say his name. I'm nobody. I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but I don't care. I don't need to say his name. I don't need to help him add his name to history. Some stuff that was disturbing about it, though, was, God bless his family. Pray for his family. He is, they've lost a son too. They lost a son years ago when he got radicalized. But they're losing a son too, and I know Charlie would want us to pray for his family and want us to pray for the shooter, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and why that is important. I feel like conservatives have made bad arguments for the death penalty in the past. Prisons are crowded, or no, I think it does have a deterrent effect. I don't care about the deterrent effect. I guess one final thing to say before I go into that is the feeling I had with all of this was this Boris Sherbina from Chernobyl, that quote, and just kept popping up in my head all week. I'm an inconsequential man, Valerie. That's all I've ever been. I hoped one day I'd matter, but I didn't. There was another quote from the Book of Swords, and I put my book with the quote bookmarked in the kitchen, and I don't want to walk away and just leave 30 seconds of dead space here, but I'll paraphrase it. Book of Swords is a wonderful fantasy series by Fred Saberhagen. Let's Google that. And we've had black space there for 20 seconds. Whoopsie. Yeah, this is this wonderful fantasy series by Fred Saberhagen. I won't go into it, but in the third book, the protagonist Mark, he sees the forces of evil moving around and whatnot. It's I would describe the series, if you love Lord of the Rings, you'll like Book of Swords. Obviously he's no Tolkien, but it's a good spiritual echo of Lord of the Rings. Like Tolkien, Saberhagen was a Catholic, and so the protagonist Mark is fighting the forces of evil, and he was fathered by the Emperor, this mysterious masked kind of clown figure, but it's like the Joker, but not from Batman, but not evil. He's this representation of goodness, but he's always hard to he's an enigma. He's a puzzle, and people don't know what to expect from him. And this boy Mark, the protagonist, was fathered by him, and he thought his stepfather was his real father, and he just found out that no, the Emperor is your father, and so the princess that he's in the service of, he's this knight, and the princess he's in the service of says, okay, go find the Emperor. This war's coming. The evil king has one of the swords of power, and it's probably the most powerful one, and we need help. We need anyone. Go make an alliance with Sir Andrew, this other friendly kingdom across the way, and go find the Emperor too. Make an alliance with him. And so Mark goes off and he finds Sir Andrew, and Sir Andrew's dead in battle with the Dark King. And so then he finds the Emperor, and he meets him, and he's just furious. How could you do that to my mother? And the Emperor says, I wanted to bring you into the world, and you have my blood, and with that you can command demons and cast them away. And Mark's like, okay. His anger kind of cools off a bit, and then he's like, oh yeah, I need to ask you for the alliance. And the Emperor just looks at him and goes, tell Princess Kristen I will be her ally for as long as she wishes. Yes, we have an alliance. And then Mark, just remembers Sir Andrew's dead, and he's like, oh yeah, I was supposed to ask about this other alliance. And so he's like, if you're our ally, why aren't you doing more? He's dead, What are you doing? And the Emperor just looks at him and goes, when you have lived as long as I have and understand as much as I do, then you can intelligently criticize what I'm doing. So I don't know why, but that's how I feel with what God is doing right now. All right. let's get to the meat. Let's talk about why we should be supporting the death penalty for this man. We're going to bring up some images here. There's some visual aids. So I was listening to a Tim Pool segment about this, and there's the back and forth. They're good, intelligent people, good, intelligent arguments, and some people are like, no, this is so bad, and there's a threat of escalating violence, and if you don't execute him, this country is a powder keg, and at least if he's executed, that some people will see that as letting off some steam, and I'll let him off. And I'm like, yep, I agree. That is a good argument, and the counter argument, and it's a good counter argument, and I want to give it a full hearing. I want to steel man it, and then I want to talk about why I don't believe it, which is, Charlie's biggest thing was his faith. His biggest thing was his faith, no doubt. And Charlie would want to preach forgiveness to this man. I agree. There's two theories of legal punishment in the criminal justice system. There's retributivism and consequentialism. We all have a bit of both in us. Consequentialism concerns itself with the consequences to society and how you administer punishment. Consequentialism is what makes us feel, when someone still steals a loaf of bread to feed their family, say, that's the quintessential thing, and we say, oh, we're mad that you're a thief, but okay, you're trying to feed your family. Okay, return it and apologize, maybe pay a fine or do community service, but that's bad consequences if we spend our tax dollars to keep you in jail. Now you're stealing from us anyway because we're having to pay extra taxes for it. We need to build more jails. Retributivism is where we get the word retribution, and that's where we get the idea and the phrase his just deserts. So and so got his just deserts. You are justly what you deserved, and that is what the thief on the cross says. Dignus factus recipimus. We are justly receiving the due consequence of our deeds. And that's the thief who said, "Remember me when you go into your kingdom," as Jesus was being crucified. That, when I thought about that is the moment that realized, I can never waver from supporting the death penalty again. At times my support had wavered and gone back and forth, and I hold no disrespect to Christians who oppose it. Let's do what Charlie would do and talk about it and have a beer. But one of the things that struck me in law school, in my criminal law class, when the professor was towards the beginning of the semester teaching about the two theories, there's interesting facts and axioms for each, and in consequentialism, it can be morally okay to punish the innocent under that theory because society will still see the punishment and they don't know for sure that he's innocent, and they'll still be deterred from the criminal activity. Whereas in retributivism, you can never punish the innocent because they haven't done anything to morally deserve it yet. That's Minority Report with Tom Cruise. Well, they would have committed a murder, and we've scientifically, with our psychics, now proved that they have, but they still don't have that guilt on them. And that's what the punishment is for. And that's the second thing that he said that has just been burned into my soul ever since. He said, punishment is the right of the offender. You have a right to be punished. And that just blew me away. It blew me away. And he illustrated it because he found one of the female students in the class, and that he just kind of visually profiled. And well, most girls in law school are kind of girl bosses. That's the personality that it attracts. So he asked this girl boss student, in the Soviet Union, he would say, women were statutorily exempt from the death penalty. Does that bother you as a woman? She's like, yeah. It's like saying, oh, for this math test, the girls only need to get an 80 to get an A instead of a 90, because girls aren't as good at math. It's like, no, I want, that was Susan B. Anthony, when she's arrested for voting. No, I want, if you say women are too frail for jail, screw that. No, put me in jail if you're going to punish me. So punishment is the right of the offender. When something is on your soul as heinous as murder, as just this cruel, barbaric, heartbreaking, society-rending murder, you deserve to have the chance to be put in a position to hear the gospel. Maybe in future episodes we'll talk a little bit more about the background of the shooter, things like that. I'm not talking about that here today. Okay, so let's go back to what Charlie wanted. Charlie would want this man to hear the gospel and have the best chance to receive it. That's what the whole novel, Crime and Punishment, is about. For your soul to be purged of this guilt and in the Old Testament, when God's dragging Israel out, into exile and being conquered and things like that, he's like, you keep walking away from me, and maybe in your suffering you'll learn to cry out to me. And that's all of us. That's our walk constantly. So imagine, if you will, that thief on the cross. He's been nailed up, and they're nailing Jesus up. And right before they're about to go by, and what they would do is they'd break your legs so that you couldn't push that's how you die during crucifixion, is your body weight drags you down so that your chest can't open to breathe, and so you have to push yourself up against the cross with your legs to breathe, or you'll suffocate, and so you're doing that with the nails, these spikes through your legs, so incredibly painful, but your natural survival instinct is so strong, you'll still keep trying it and doing it for the most part. Obviously some would pass out from the pain and then they'd die or whatnot, and then the Romans would come and break your legs, so you couldn't do that anymore to finish you off. Imagine, if you will, before they do all of this stuff, they've got them roped up and affixed to the cross, but not nailed in yet. And they say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Thief on the cross that's going to be to the side of Jesus. Governor Pilate has just reviewed your case, and he's authorized to grant clemency here, and we're going to grant it. You can go home, sir. We'll knock it down to time served. Maybe do some community service. We'll talk." That action just sent that thief to hell, whereas that thief was the first person to meet Jesus in heaven. He was. That is what you are stealing from someone when you take away the death penalty, when you take away justice. So that's all I've got for today. Hope I've given you all something to think about. Feel free to leave a comment. Again, as I said in the first episode, this is just a side gig for me. I'm not trying to become an influencer or anything like that. I have a good day job. I have a family to support, everything like that. So I just, wanted to get my thoughts out there every now and then. So, nevertheless, I don't monetize this channel, but I still appreciate it if you would like and subscribe, leave comments, build some engagement. I want this to be a good community, and I look forward to reading some comments and engaging with you all throughout the week. God bless you all. Have a good week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.